All right, things are going to get slightly more complicated now in our blues series. So far what we've done is we've looked at kind of scales, easy ones, pentatonic scale, major and minor, and the blues scale. And the great thing about these scales is you're not really thinking about them. So what I mean by that is when you're playing a blues, you've got 3 chords in the key of A, D and E, all right? Now, we're talking really about kind of a major blues here. So what happens if you want to play the changes? All right, so what that means is every time the chord changes, so say for example you're on an A chord, you're playing something to do with A. When it goes to a D chord, you're playing something to do with D. When you go to the E chord, you're playing something to do with E. Now, normally what blues players do, not all of the time, but you think of one scale, you know, you'll have the chord of A, you'll play pentatonic over it. Chord of D, pentatonic over it. E, pentatonic over it. So what we're talking about today is we're going to follow the chords around. Now this takes a little bit more thinking, and there are 3 shapes, actually 2 shapes we're going to use, because the second shape is the same as the third shape is the same as the second shape. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you some dominant 7 arpeggios. These are going to sound really musical and make you start sounding really good, and you can even start improvising without the chords at all and playing solo guitar, and that'll sound really good. So let me show you the shapes, and then I'll give you some examples of how you can start using them in your jamming and over your playing. Alright, so arpeggios. Now this means broken chord, and it is the notes from a chord. Now what we're going to learn today is the 7 arpeggios, dominant 7 arpeggios. Alright, so A7 for a blues, D7 or D9 I'm playing there, and E9, all right, or E7, okay? So now here is the first arpeggio. This is A7 arpeggio, so it goes like this. Okay, so let me tell you what that is. That's A, that's the A note. It's the 4th fret there on the A, the 7th fret on the A, the 5th fret on the D, the 7 on the D, the 6 on the G, 5 here on the B, 8 on the B, 5 on the high E, and finally 9 on the high E there. Right, now, what am I doing here? Now, you're playing the notes from this chord, A7, which are A, C sharp, E, and G. Now, these are what they call your chord tones, you see. So that's your root note, that's the 3rd of the chord, that's the 5th of the chord, the E, the 7th of the chord. Now if you're not too sure what all of that means, if you play the major scale, the Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La, Ti, Do, and you count up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. When I say the first note of the chord, the first note is an A. Now what's the 3rd? You count up 3, 1, 2, 3 is C sharp. 5th note, 4, 5 is that one. And the 7th, now this is where it goes wrong, you might think. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So why am I playing that note when I do this arpeggio? Look at this. Okay, should be that note, shouldn't it? Well, in the dominant 7 chord, if you look at this shape, there's that note there. It's actually what they call a flat 7th. So you take the 7th note, the ordinary 7th note, and you move it back 1. That's a flat 7th. So we've got, for this arpeggio, we've got the root, the 3rd, the 5th, and the 7th. Then you go back to the beginning, and all these other notes are the same notes, just repeated, another octave in other words. So let me just play that for you. Here's the chord. You can go back. Okay, right, that's A7. Now let's have a look at D7. Here we go. Slightly different shape. I'm still going to start on the same note though. So this is the 5th. I'm starting on the 5th of the chord. So the notes I need for the D, 7 are D, F sharp, A and C. All right, so I'm just playing those notes in this position. So we've got. All right, so that is 5 on the low E, 3 on the A, 5 on the A, 4 on the D, 7 on the D, 5 on the G, 7 on the G, 7 on the B, 5 on the high E, and 8 here on the high E. So we got. Now, it's probably more common just to start on the D note there. So you can do that. Now, that's the D7 arpeggio. For E7, it's exactly the same. Just move up 2 frets. So then we've got. Alright, that's E7 arpeggio. So exactly the same. You can start it on the E note there on the 7th fret. Right, that's good. Now you can learn these arpeggios by the numbers. But the problem is, you won't ever know what you're doing. So when you're playing arpeggios, you really want to know the notes. And the reason is because you're playing over chords. Now this is kind of jazzy really, but instead of playing one scale like we did before, you know, for the pentatonic scale and the blues scale. So instead of doing that kind of thing, where you're just using one scale over each of the changes, now every time the chords change, you have to change. Okay. Now, this is a very important piece of information. When you're doing this, these arpeggios, an A7 arpeggio, it's working just over an A7 chord. Okay, so when you're playing an A7 chord, you have to play an A7 arpeggio. When you're playing a D7 chord, you can play a D7 arpeggio. When you're playing an E7 chord, you play an E7 arpeggio. Now, obviously, this is a lot more thinking than just playing a, just a pentatonic scale. You've got to think every time there's a chord change, I've got to change arpeggios. And also, the other place you can use it is a place which is kind of not major or minor. And you know when you do this, that classic blues thing there, that isn't major or minor. So you have the choice of using minor pentatonic, major pentatonic, you can use the blues scale, or you can use arpeggios. I'll do a separate video on putting all these things together and where you could use it. So if you use this, it goes through your blues. So if you think of a phrase, a bit of rhythm. This is D. Back to A. E. D. So I just played through kind of a rough blues there, but following the changes. And can you hear it sounds much more melodic, doesn't it, than just going through your pentatonic scale. Obviously, with the pentatonic scale, you can still sound really good. You can still sound good with licks. But if you really want to follow the changes and sound really melodic, this is the way to do it, with these arpeggios. So have a little jam over the chords, or get a little groove yourself. So I'm just going A7 to D. So you can make a little jam or get someone else to play it. And what's really nice about this is when you play, you sound so melodic, you don't need the chords. So if you can keep that rhythm in your head, that's what I do. I kind of start off with a... Now, just see if you can keep that in your head. Now D. A. So what? Another way to do that, if you have trouble keeping the kind of chords in your head, is just play a chord, go D. And then play something from the arpeggio. At first, when you start doing this, you're going to sound like you're playing an arpeggio, you know. You're going to go... Which is all right, because can you see instantly you sound much more musical there. So have a muck about with that and see what works for you. I know that's a lot to take in. So just first thing is to learn those shapes if you can, okay? Learn them, go over them, and then the next step is put a little backing track down and see if you can just play the arpeggios straight. Now, coming up, I'm going to do a little video on how to use all of these ideas we've learned. So, and where to use them is the most important thing, because, for example, as I said in this lesson here, you can't use a dominant 7 arpeggio over an A minor chord, for example. Also, when you're playing major pentatonics, there's certain places you can use them, certain places you can't use them. So that video is coming up next. If you've got any questions, write them below or send me an email and I'll be happy to help, because I've been in the same spot you are, you know, learning all this stuff. I know how kind of confusing it can get. So send me an email. Good luck with that. Hope you enjoy it and have some fun.